Hey there, and welcome to Swimming with Sharks. I'm your host, Kevin Dean, and I'm thrilled to have you join us as we navigate the fast-moving waters of AI in the enterprise. Today, I'm joined with a true pioneer in the world of AI-driven business agility, Anthony Coppedge. We're diving into AI's role in transforming enterprise sales, marketing, and customer engagement. Anthony, it is so great to have you on the show. Super excited to talk. We're living in very interesting times, my friend, and there is a lot of things that are changing. We've got technology changes, we've got changes in the way that businesses are run, we've got changes in the global perspective of things. There's a lot of changes going on right now, and with that, there's a lot of need for people and businesses to really understand how to navigate all of these changes. So what have you been really thinking about recently with all of these changes that are going on?
Well, Kevin, I would say the rate of change is greater than any single change itself, right? It's easy to point to, Gen AI. It is the generative AI is the kind of the new kid on the block and the thing that everybody's talking about, and rightfully so, because I think it's as important as the discovery and the integration and beginning of the internet. I think it's that important. I think Gen AI is finally taking a lot of the automations and machine learning things we've been doing and making it more contextually relevant and easier to interact with. So before, it would require a great deal of hardware, software, and frankly, technical know-how to get those results. In the not too distant past, just within the last 5 years, in my work at IBM, before Gen AI, I was using natural language processing, which is an aspect of it, but it was basically saying, if I give you all this text as data, can you parse it as data rather than just looking at it as text? And the answer is yes. So it's super helpful to understand the frequency of phrases, words, how often they appear in context with or without other words, the emotion, the tone, the sentiment, because it tells you much more than just what the word says. Much like in our conversation, when we talk, there is emphasis on certain words, there's certain tonalities that we'll have, and that will change the meaning of the word. It's the old joke of, if you say to a dog, "Come here, little doggy, I want to pet you." That sounds wonderful. You say, "Come here, little doggy, I want to harm you." The tone is exactly the same, but the words are different, right? So you want to match and make sure that you understand both aspects of it. And that's kind of a crazy example, but the principle is there. You can say the same thing 4 or 5 different ways, especially in the English language when words have more than one meaning. And now you start losing context. It's also why I think that, text is a wonderful tool, but it's a terrible communication medium because there's so much lost in it that's just not present in a voice piece. So it has its place, but it does not replace. AI will be the force multiplier for that change, I think, because it's made it accessible to the common person.
Yeah, that is so amazing. And you and I we're not spring chickens, and we've been around the block, and we understand that this technology has been in place in iterations over time, right? And you and I have both been doing this at the enterprise level for a long time. But you are correct that there is this force multiplier. There's these shifts that are happening. And I agree that, this is like the shift to the internet. And so companies have to think differently and stop thinking about this as a technology issue, but a leadership issue and a change management issue. How do you think about helping companies think through the other changes that are impacted by the technology change?
You said a phrase in there as you were framing that question that I resonate with, and I talk about and write about it almost ad nauseum, right? And it's this: thinking differently. Because we know for a fact that behavior modification doesn't stick. We know the psychology has already proven it, that if you change someone's behavior for a period of time, they have a very good chance of not consistently staying with that behavior. We do know that if you change someone's mind about something, their behaviors follow. So in order to think differently, right, that's the necessary thing. You have to understand why you believe what you believe today. So, and pick the topic, right? Work from home versus going back to the office. That's a hot topic right now. There is a belief informing both sides of that equation. And there's data informing both sides of that equation. And at the end of the day, I'm not very interested in that debate, because I think it's a preference of executive leadership and what style they want to have for a culture, and if there's real estate involved. I mean, I think those are the two main reasons for back to office. And that's not bad. It's just true. So if that's super important to them, then they're going to understand there's a portion of the populace, a much faster growing portion of the populace, that says forcing one way of working is a bad long-term move, not only for who you can hire, but who you can retain and the culture that's left behind. So I think that you have to have a hybrid mentality, or a thinking different mentality about it, and solve for the problems that are important, not the preferences. That's an easy thing to say and a very hard thing to do, because there's pros and cons for both. But the principle is, did we think differently? Do we know our why? Do we understand our beliefs? Because it's one thing, and we see this everywhere. You name a company that you haven't seen this in, frankly, right? Where you go on the walls of their businesses, or even in their video calls, and they've got the little, values and mission statement stuff. It's always talked about, but what you see is what's acted out. So your culture is not what you say it is. It's right. It's the worst behaviors tolerated. It's the things that people do in spite of what's on the walls or on those posters. What you're really trying to get to is, how do people behave when they're not being forced into compliance, right? If you just want to look at the natural aspect of how people interact and behave together, that tells you about your culture. And it's kind of like your brand. Your brand is also not what you say it is. Your brand is what everybody else says it is. Now, you can influence that and you can work to change that, but your brand is your brand representation in the market. It's what people perceive to be true about you. And that perception then becomes reality. And we've seen that with stocks. We've seen that with companies failing. We've seen that with companies that were too hyped and then had a crash. It's all over the place. But it all comes back to this thing, Kevin. Are we thinking differently? Do we understand our why? And if so, then we would say, well, what would help us, or what would detract us from achieving our mission and our vision? What would be in the way of that? So things like Gen AI might be a very natural thing to add in, but you wouldn't do it because everybody else is doing it. You're doing it because you're understanding when, where, how, and why would we accomplish the leveraging of this technology, and what that technology means to us and those we serve. If you ask those kind of questions, you're probably going to set yourself up for some hard but necessary changes in your own business.
That's really great. And I've been hearing a lot of people talk about creating a Gen AI culture. So based on what you're talking about, do you think companies need to be thinking about developing a Gen AI culture? And if so, how would they do it? And if not, what should they be thinking about?
That's like saying, I want to have a Microsoft Office culture, or I want to have a cloud-based culture. The technology is a means to an end. The technology is a part of the equation. It's not the point. So should you leverage Gen AI? In a lot of businesses, absolutely. I mean, force multiplier is usually a good thing. But the thing about any technology is inherently it's dumb. What do I mean by that? It's not smart enough to know when or where to multiply. So if you want to scale something, I always talk about this in my little nerd idea of going back to middle school, where you learned about the order of operations. So in math, you do the work inside the parentheses, then you use the multiplier or the divider or whatever that is, and then you do the next work in the parentheses. And it's the idea. The reason I bring that simple thing up is, right now, if you have poor processes, redundant systems, bad communication, and you want to put Gen AI to scale, you will scale all of that, right? Because it doesn't understand the stuff that's poor. It just takes whatever the input is and tries to do whatever you've asked it to do at scale. So if you want bad stuff faster, you can get that. But I don't think that's what we want, right? So the idea, Kevin, I think, is to say, how do we understand and first look at what we want to do? In his book, Atomic Habits, James Clear says, the best way to optimize upside is first to decrease downside. Anthony's translation. If we suck less for a while at something, eventually we'll suck not at all, right? And sucking less is a form of winning. So it's okay to say, what could we do to start reducing the pain, or reduce or mitigate or eliminate the things that are in our way? What are the downsides we could get rid of before we scale, before you throw a force multiplier at it? Because you want it to multiply what's left over as the best, or the best you can get to, and then multiply that. You don't want to multiply all of those negatives, because the technology doesn't understand, right? It doesn't think in that way. And you can only program it to a certain point. The things that gets put to Gen AI, how did you get it to put it there? right? It's not just naturally in every database and every system and every tool. It's not like that. So you have to be intentional about it today. I'm sure we'll have better integration as we go, but the idea is garbage in, garbage out. That is still true. Don't let Gen AI as a strategy lull you into believing you just need to do more faster, and it helps you do more faster. More of the wrong thing faster is not winning. So you first must look at your systems, processes, people, and say, honestly, where are we? And I've created things like the ODAM, the outcome-driven alignment model, to help us bring disparate groups together to assess the overall customer journey and say, what are the pain points? Oh, product knows about this, sales has experienced this, marketing says this, and they've never talked together. And meanwhile, the customer is getting 3 different messages from 3 different portions of the business, and they feel like they're being spammed. Why? Because we've not solved for those pain points yet. And until you do, throwing Gen AI at it or any other force multiplier, any other technology is probably premature.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that until you solve those core problems, Gen AI is immature, premature. But what we're seeing, and you mentioned this earlier, we're in a fundamental shift. Just like the internet changed and shifted everything, mobile changed and shifted everything.
Yep.
I believe that Gen AI, and I'm specifically saying Gen AI because AI has been around for decades.
Long time.
But Gen AI is going to change everything again, but I think it's going to change things faster and greater than we've seen in quite some time. So how do businesses stop thinking about Gen AI, but thinking about what is the strategic next move that we need to be making as a business with all of these things coming in as fundamental shifts that are going to be a riptide?
Kevin, I would say the answer to that has been the answer to that for a while, but it's a hard one to do, and that's clarity with alignment. Until you have clarity with alignment so that your proverbial left hand and your proverbial right hand are on the same page, singing from the same hymn sheet, right? Until you get that, it's really hard. And you can see this in a lot of ways. How many different databases do you have at work? How many sources of truth do you have, right? That's a very easy but common one where I see, well, we didn't really build an extensible tech stack. So now we have a marketing database that some of it's passed through to sales, but not all of it. And there's stuff that maintains over here, and we manually do these reports. And just pick the area: operations, service, support. All of them have their own areas, finance. Everybody's got their own sets of data. Well, what you've got to do is be able to say, how do we connect the important pieces? And this is probably going to be done through API. So what you want to do is connect the tools, but then you have to go, but what's the process? It's not just enough to say connect tools and it all works out. You have to build and think through the process that you want to achieve a better outcome. So more activity measurement's not going to make you better. Right. And I see this a lot in business. They go, oh, it can help accelerate and do all this manual work faster. Sure, it can. Should you be doing it to begin with?
That's a great point. That is a great point. Should you be doing that to begin with? And I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to interrupt you.
You're fine.
Because,
You're fine.
And the reason I want to interrupt you, because I think that is so important, especially with where we are now. Should we be doing what we are doing, right? And I understand your process. I know you've done a lot of great writing about this alignment piece. But let's say that I get alignment, right? Which is hard. That's so hard. But I get alignment, but then I figure out we're aligned not to the right things. How do you get people now to make that shift?
So what you have to first do is put all the cards on the table. So and I don't want to sound like a sales pitch here, but the ODAM model, the reason I came up with the outcome-driven alignment model was for what you're describing, and it's everywhere. This is not unique to just large companies. It's problematic at scale in large companies, but you see it everywhere. And it's, how do I get everybody to understand what winning or what success looks like? Because right now, if I were to go to most organizations and sit in one of their calls or sit in one of their meetings, what I would hear is them talk about their goals and their KPIs, because that's how they, quote unquote, measure success. And to me, that's an interesting way to do it, because those are always lagging indicators. You have to fail or succeed in the market before, if you know if you're going to achieve your goal and what your KPIs are telling you, right there. It's always after the fact. Well, wouldn't it be great to pivot before it started to fail? This would be the way I think about it. So what I did is I said, if you frame a way of working, and I'm just going to pick three groups for simplicity: product, marketing, sales. Very common that those three work together. Services, marketing, sales, pick it, right? But if you say, okay, what are your goals and KPIs, product? What are your goals and KPIs, marketing? What are your goals, KPIs, sales? And they come and you get this done beforehand. But in this workshop, we come and we actually list those out and we go, this is what we're measured on. This is what defines success for us. And we ask three questions. And those three questions are: what would happen if we focused on what was in for the client? What would success look like for the average client that we're working with? And how would we tie that success back to the things that we're measuring? Right? So in the middle of that, in order to do this, you have to agree on something. This is that alignment piece. So the clarity is, what is our why? And then the alignment is, what is our way? So your way with your why together. I would call that vision and mission. So if you know your why, then you know your way, and that's unique to your business. So it's not something someone else can do. So when you understand that, now they go, okay, sales, tell me how your goals and KPIs align to this why in this way. And frankly, so often they don't, right? Somebody came up with a number that they have to hit, and it has very little to do with other than some abstraction of, well, it helps us succeed in the market. Okay, does it? But what I want to do is say, tell me what it looks like to be successful for this persona, for that client type, for this prospect type. Tell me what would make their world better, and not the feature and the benefit, which is where everybody goes, but what would their business be better at or suck less at if they worked with us, our technology, our tool, our product or service, whatever. And if we understand and can solicit that feedback and understand what does success look like for them, well, now you've changed the game entirely, because not only can I align marketing, sales, and product together, I can say, hey, if we did objective A and objective B, that would help marketing and sales. Objective C helps sales and product. Objective D helps marketing and product, but not so much sales. That's okay, as long as we can map through that North Star, which is a mission and a vision, right? If our why and our way are clear, and we say, well, if we believe it'd be great to deliver this, and we think we would do it in these ways, here's your leading indicators. We would call those your experiments, your hypothesis, your testing, those strategies you're trying to go to market with. And if you see how they're performing, you learn that very, very quickly. You don't have to wait a quarter. But when you do get your quarterly stuff, you can map it and go, did this make a change plus or minus in this quarter, in this month, in this year? And you, over time, get a lot more insight around that. And it starts to teach you, we've been measuring this. It's not even that valuable. Why are we focusing that? Because what we learn is that this is really delivering value for the clients. Because, surprise, surprise, the thing the client is in for is not you making more sales. They're just not interested in your metrics around that. They're very interested in what's in it for them, as they should be. So until and unless you understand what their success criteria are, you will always be in a price battle. You will always be up against a competitor who's willing to go a few points lower. But if you change that conversation of, hey, Kevin, here's the proposal for everything. It meets these four value things that you've described. And you go, Anthony, that's great. I got about half that budget. Okay, well, I'm sure we could reduce some of that value for you. And you're like, no, I want all the value. And I go, well, this is what that value costs. We can reduce value and we can get you a lower price, but you can't get more value for a lower number, right? That's just not how that works. I'm happy to work with you, but let's talk about it. And what I find is when you present it that way, when value is the focus, price is not. It doesn't mean that you can charge whatever you want, but there's a reasonable price point that says if that value is worth it, you should be able to calculate to some extent what that valuable outcome is for them. Well, then the price is a math equation. Of course it's worth it. Right? I don't ever give discounts, ever. Why? Because value is high. And if they don't value what you value, and go back to what I said at the beginning, if they don't believe what you believe, right? You shouldn't.
Price is what you pay, value is what you get, right? And so you have to focus on delivering value. And I think where businesses are struggling, one of the areas that businesses are struggling, and I think they're going to continue to struggle, for a little bit now as we see these shifts, is what is of value and how valuable is our vision, and does it still stand up, right? I think those are going to be some big questions that businesses have to grapple with over this next coming shift that we're seeing, right?
And the rate of change, which we go back to the very, very beginning, is so great that if you're not pivoting as you go, then anything you react to will be, by definition, late. You need to be able to respond in the market, not react to the market.
So talk to me about, how do you maintain alignment in a time where you're constantly shifting? So how do you keep that? Because that's important.
What we have to be able to do is question everything. So regardless of the role, when I bring these people together, I will have executives, I will have subject matter experts, and I'll have them across those business units. So I have a group that normally doesn't all sit together. So I would do this in a workshop, scenario. And I say, there's no rank in this room. If you're the CEO and you're in this room, doesn't matter. All voices are equal. And the reason I want to do this is the best ideas need to win. And so that means you have to build a culture of respect, openness, courage, empathy, trust, ROCKET or OCET. And that means it's got to be safe to say hard things. So if our vision is to be X, Y, and Z, and the way we're going to do that is A, B, and C, well, then you better be very clear about that. And if it turns out that the market no longer values what you're about, you're on the short road to obsolescence. Right. And you need to be clear about that. Understand, can you provide value? And what does that mean? Not can you deliver something? It means, can you create and deliver something that someone else desires and is willing to pay for it? Right. So very simple, but hard to talk about when you can't say no to things, when you can't push back on this goal or this KPI. When that's not allowed, game over. It's just a matter of time before you lose. So what I want to do is say, can we talk about these things and say, why do we even have this goal? There was a time, I'm sure, that was useful. Where we are now, the data represents, the insights say this, the feedback tells us. Way more important to focus on this versus this. Maybe we should continue to measure it to understand it, but we shouldn't make our business decisions off of it. Let me give you a very simple example of that. One of them had to do with social engagement. So when they looked at social, they said, look at the number of impressions. Whether that was on a website or social media, the impressions were everything. And in fact, it used to be that when you paid for advertising based on impressions. And so the idea was lots of eyeballs. Lots of eyeballs scrolling past you doesn't help you. You want the action. So the action was then divided into two things, three, but two types. One is, do they like or engage with your content? Do they give you a thumbs up? Do they share, whatever? And then do they comment? Is there an action that they take? Because those who will do that, or someone who will fill out a form on a website, or someone who will enter with the chat bot, that's a different level of engagement than the passive. That's active engagement. So you have passive and active. And what I really wanted to understand was not what was the impressions. Sure, it's a useful number to know, because what would it tell me is if I have 1 million impressions, but 10 actions, I have a very, very, very poor conversion rate. So I would rather have 1,000 of the right impressions than 1 million of the wrong ones, especially if I'm paying for it, right? That's a very simple example, yet marketing was hamstrung by what we called vanity metrics for years, decades of, well, they want to know this. Well, it's hard to show the full attribution model, so we're just going to show them all this activity and go, isn't that great? I'm like, I don't know, is it great or is it terrible? And then the other piece of that is when you represent it, can you represent the truth in a way that goes against the bias? And here's what I mean by that. I use a dashboard as a training exercise that shows on the left-hand side that the number of leads, the number of leads coming in the funnel went down. So it's got a red down arrow. Why? Because red is bad, right? And then on the right, I show that the number of conversions is green. It's gone up. And what I want to say is all of this should be green. Why? Because what it tells you, if you start looking at that, is the reason you can go up in conversions and down in total number of leads is because you got rid of the chaff and you started getting more wheat. So you did a better job of figuring out who was likely to convert, and your conversion rates prove that. You don't need as many when you get better results. But red is bad, down is bad, so you better roll that up. No, it's great. It's wonderful. We have less junk coming through. Sellers and marketers aren't dealing with noise. We're focusing on more meat, so it's a more useful thing to look at. But you got to break that thinking that says red, bad, green, good. No, red, true, green, true. And what about that truth is useful? So you want to take and say, okay, if we want to scale this, maybe GenAI, pulling it back to that in the conversation, could help us learn to do this better. Probably. But what you're going to have to first figure out is, do you even know what's good or not coming in? Because more isn't better. And that's a hard thing to sell when that's been the metric of success for marketing, for example, for so long. Or sales. Did you make enough calls? I actually had a seller once when I was teaching agility for sales, teaching them how to work. And the seller, he'd been doing it for, I guess, about 3 weeks. So his last 2 weeks, he pulls me over to his desk. I remember this. I was up in Philadelphia. And he says, hey, Anthony, come here. I want to show you. I made 200 calls this week. And I made 200 calls last week. He was very proud of himself. And I said, awesome. How many OI or opportunities identified or leads did you get? Well, none, but I made 400 calls. I said, funny thing is we don't actually pay you to make calls. We pay you to generate leads. Should you make calls and get leads? Yes. But I would rather that after 50 calls of seeing nothing's working, start asking some questions about, am I calling at the right time? Do I have the right number? Is this the right persona? Do I have the right message? There's a lot of things you could ask rather than continuing to do the thing that's not working, right? Because what he was telling me is it's a numbers game. To him, he just got to make. And it turns out he had a quota of how many calls to make. So I had to go to the manager and go, this is stupid. Let's stop doing dumb things. Let's instead say, if it doesn't work, let's reflect and pivot and see if we can change something to get better. Maybe it's time to go use LinkedIn Navigator and go, use that strategy for a while. Maybe it's time to go through your database and follow back with people you haven't talked to in a while. Whatever it is, there are other activities besides continuing to do something, more of something, or do it faster and call that success. Activity is not useful. The hamster goes very, very fast on a wheel, makes no progress, right? So I don't need more activity. I need more outcomes. And that outcome alignment model helps us identify what are we doing that's activity-based and what are we doing that's value-based. And when you start seeing that, then you see, oh, let's put a technology here and scale this. Here's a good application for GenAI. Here's a good application for machine learning. Here's a good application for content marketing automation, whatever. Because now you're solving for something and you're doing that solving with the technology, not trying to identify what should be done with the technology. That's audible.
No, that's great. And so that makes me think about conversations that a lot of people are having right now about the makeup of the future workforce. And people are starting to identify agents as, almost another worker, right? So you've got, John, Joe, and agent A, B, and C as workers. How do you feel about that conforming model? And can you still get alignment with using agents as another quote unquote employee within your organization?
I think the idea of what you're talking about is agentic AI. Agentic AI is where we're going, and you're seeing some early signs of it now, but it's not mostly there. When people go to ChatGPT, they're not creating an agentic AI, even if they build their own custom GPT. They're not there yet, right? But we do see that coming. Would you treat a bot like an employee? No. But would you work with that bot like an employee? Yes. Right? So the difference is on the human side, I'm trying to understand what are your personal motivations? What's life like for you? Because as a leader, I believe I've got two mandates. Well, as a manager, I've got two mandates. One, get crap out of your way, and two, scale you up. But as a leader, I'm more interested in who you are than what you do. Now let that sink in. If you work for me and we're in the same organization, I'm like, what do you mean you're more interested in who I am than what I do? I know that if I take an interest in Kevin and I try to understand what your motivations are intrinsically, what's life like for you? How are you doing? How's your family? How's things? Because the more I understand about you, the more I understand when to lean in and when to not, when to ask for, when to make room, right? That empathy then becomes an incredibly important part of building the holistic employee experience because I'm building relational equity. I don't have to build relational equity with a bot. I do have to train a bot. I do have to train an agentic AI. I have to teach it things or parameters, but it doesn't have the emotion. It doesn't have the life outside that's impacting how it performs. So that's why I make that distinction. So much of the employee experience shouldn't be about the job. And I know that's going to be like, are you kidding? What kind of terrible manager are you? No, I'm one of the better managers, I think. I've been told frequently I'm one of the best people work for. Not to pat myself on the back, because I freaking care, right? Because when you care, when you genuinely care what's for someone, not what you want from someone, they tend to do even better work. You get more from them. I don't do that to manipulate them. It's not a if then that. It's just a truth. The more I lean into creating really healthy, holistic teams who trust and honor and respect each other, when you lead with humility and you truly, genuinely care, I don't have a span of control now. I have a span of care. And that span of care is going to get me a much better set of outcomes over a longer period of time than maybe pushing for something and driving for it today. I think command and control needs to go away, right, in corporate America or corporate business, period. And I think instead what we have to have is a span of care, because if you will, and this is not about hard versus soft, this is about human versus not, right? There's got to be buy-in at an empathetic level that says, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes and understand what that might be like. That sounds really hard. Here's some ways we can help you with that. People will give you their best when you do that. So I'm going to need to train up an agentic bot, an agentic AI tool much better, right? There's ways I could do that. But I can't just do that with the human because you got the whole human experience that they're bringing to work. And so I believe personally, and I lead out of this, I'm going to work with what's in it for you, not what can I get from you.
I love that. I love that. So let me ask you this, with that, this is a perfect kind of wrap up. Like if someone wanted to work with you, how would they get to work with you?
Well, in a number of roles, I care very little about the title or the role. What I want is the opportunity to make an impact and really help groups of people learn to work better together. Because I think as a collective, we're better than any one superstar could ever be. And so what I want to do is work in scenarios where that's true. So what I'm really talking about is a culture that says we're going to be humble, we're going to be caring, we're going to support each other, we're going to have each other's backs, we're going to have honesty and candor, but we're going to do that with kindness. We're not going to shame and blame. You know, when you get a chance to work in a group like that, if you've ever had that experience, it's game changer. Because when you've not had that, or when you work in a place where it's about the numbers or the metrics, did you do your thing, and it's just about performance, I want good performance. But if that's what you aim for, careful, you might get it and then burn through people and have high turnover and a terrible reputation in the market. Don't want that. So long-term sustainability and the ability to pivot and reinvent and adapt comes with, I think, the territory of learning to be more empathetic as a leader and learning to see the whole person rather than just the employee. So I'm happy to do that for any organization that wants to value people like that.
That's awesome. So just a personal type of thing. I'm a big music guy. I love music.
Me too.
Tell me.
I come from a musical family, actually.
Do you really?
Yeah, my grandfather was a world famous jazz trombonist who played with all the big greats. I remember getting a call from Frank Sinatra when he visited us in San Antonio. Doc Severinsen and my grandfather, he used to lead the Johnny Carson band, for the Tonight Show. I mean, he's all those guys. So I come from that background. Yeah.
Oh man, that is so awesome. I did not know that. Yeah. I did not know that. So, what I like to ask all my guests, this is my big thing. Give me something after you and I hop off this call that I can go plug in and go listen to. Something a little to the left.
Well, you're going to have to go listen to my grandfather's albums. I mean, and you could do it with whether if you want to listen to Stan Kenton live at Redmond, or you could go to Woody Herman, or you could go to or his own stuff. I think Burgess Surges is one of his self-titled albums that he did, and just crazy great musician with phenomenal stories. It was great. He's passed now, but just a legend in the music big band world. So Burgess Surges would be the album I'd go search on any of your favorite music streaming services.
I'm gonna go do it. I'm gonna do that right after this. I'm gonna go rock out. All right. So just one last question. How can people get in touch with you?
My website, anthonycoppedge.com, or LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So it's linkedin.com/n/Anthony Coppedge. It's /Anthony Coppedge on all the socials because I'm on all of them. But I'm very easy to get a hold of. And my job, of course, is to give away as much as I know. So feel free to reach out.
I love it, man. This has been such a great conversation. As always, always enjoy it. Thanks, my friend, and I look forward to many more conversations.
Thanks so much. Bye.